Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lunch and Learn at our lovely village of Ohsweken. First of all, I want to introduce myself to any of you that don't know me. I'm Kitty Arlyn Lickers. I work at Health as the Special Projects Officer Community Food Animator, which means I make food dance. No, I animate programs in the community about food, anything related to food. This is going to come as a big shocker, but everything is related to food. Today in particular, they've asked me to talk about gardening and getting started because the weather is changing, the earth is changing, all of those things are happening. So I kind of did a little bit of a process in my head because the timeline is short. So I'll do a little bit of a touch on almost everything. First, I'm going to address the work that's been done over here by Tanis because, oh my goodness, amazing. All of the things over here, please take the time to go and look at them. One of the things that she's done is she's shown you the different ways that you can start plants. And I'm presuming that's just potting soil that's in them. One of the things that I will be talking to you a little bit about is how to get your soil in your garden space, if it's outside on the ground, if it's how to get it ready, and if it's not, if it's in containers or pots or hanging baskets. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But when you're starting your plants, and she does have a few things over there, she's got them in baggies for starting them, any kind of paper to get that little plant to come out. So one of the key components, so you have to make sure, she did some fabulous work, bravo, hats off to you, that's great, that looks amazing. There's a table there with a few resources on it. Considering that we are an agricultural people, that table should be so laden down with books and documents that it shouldn't be able to hold it. Interestingly enough, there's not a lot of actual information about gardening that pertains directly to us. There's some, and a lot of it is things that people knew or learned or as they were growing up. But the concept of starting seeds ahead of time, and I'm glad you did that. I wanted you to know that there are actual containers that they have found, baskets type things, where we would have used those to sprout seeds or to get the seeds ready. So corn especially is one of the seeds that we would have sprouted. When you're putting your white corn in, you put it into the container, you cover it with water, you leave it sit over till the next day, and the next day the little tiny tail has come out. So every seed has a little baby plant in it. So just imagine every little seed and there's a little baby in there, so happy. I'm just so happy in there. And that little baby is what will come out. The first thing that comes out, depending on what it is, because with beans it's a root and a seed, and one of the things I'm going to touch on is how far to put your seeds in the ground, because that's one of the key components where people find that they're having failure. Their plants won't grow and they don't know why. So the idea is to give your seed the best opportunity to flourish, to grow and to come out. So the number one thing that you have to think about first of all is where you're growing them, what your soil is going to be like, and how to figure out if that soil is got everything that you need for your plants to grow very well, for your seeds to sprout and for them to grow plants and for you to have a big harvest. So if you have a garden spot already and you've gardened there before, anybody? No? Okay. Yeah, some of you? Okay. So the thing that you have to remember is that soil is kind of like a meal. Imagine your big garden as a meal, and you're looking at it, and it's a Thanksgiving dinner. Okay? So the first year, the plants are like, whoa, check this out. There's a humongous dinner for us. They just eat. They grow big. You get lots of produce off of it. There's all kinds of fruit, and you get all kinds of things to harvest and store for the winter. The second year, they're like, oh man, someone's been picking at the turkey. It's a little bit thin now. There's hardly any mashed potatoes left. The food that's in that space by the second year is a little bit thinner. The plants will still grow. You may not get as many things the second year as you did the first. By the third year, they're all like, dang, I came an hour late to Thanksgiving dinner. There's nothing left here but some crusts and maybe a little bit of scraps of squash and stuff. The seeds are doing the same thing. Then they have to really search. So instead of spending time growing a plant that gets big, lots of blossoms and lots of fruit, it spends time putting roots down, going, somewhere in here there's something to eat, and it'll search. You may water it, you may, keep the weeds down, but the soil itself is starting to run out of the food to feed the plants and the seeds. So if you already have an established space, what you need to be doing in the fall is getting it prepped and ready for the next year's planting. If you did not do that, perfectly okay, you can still do it now. Now is a good time to do it. And this is where I talk to people all the time. If you have a garden space already established, or if you want to establish a garden space and all you have is a lawn, this is the best, this will work. You can still do it now. Fall is the ideal time, spring also good. So what you're going to do, even in your already established garden, you're going to add food to that table. So what you're going to be adding to it is browns and greens, which are carbon and nitrogen. And those browns and greens are the same thing that you use to break down your compost in your compost pile. So in a compost pile, you're looking at greens to browns. The ratio is about 5 to 10. So that means like 10, 15 centimeters of like leaves and cardboard and shredded newspaper, and then 3 to 5 centimeters of like table scraps, food scraps, plant matter, that kind of thing. Never put plants into your compost bin that have flowers on them, because there's a chance there'll be seeds. So if it's a weed, you're welcome to put the weed into your compost, but only if it has not gone to flower yet, because then you only have plant material. The flower has the potential to have already seeds established in it. So you're feeding your garden with those greens and browns. In an established garden where you already have a space set out, you've planted in it before, you put all of that stuff on top, and you're just going to sort of gently stir it into the top. What we don't recognize, it's recognized, but what we don't think about is that in our soil, and I should probably ask this first, how many of you have clay soil in where you intend to garden? Yeah, so this close to the river, it's really likely that you have clay soil. Here's the thing, clay soil is literally the best soil in the world in terms of pH and nutrients. The difficulty is it's very dense. So instead of being aerated and having spaces for the roots and seeds to be, it's compacted. So what you're doing when you're in your established garden or the new garden that you're going to start is you're going to put the compost, the leaves, the food scraps, all of that in, not just to feed the soil, but in the instance of having clay, you're literally creating space for it. The space for air and water, because roots need air and water just like the plants do. So in an established garden, you can just put your leaves and table scraps and just kind of gently stir them in. I'm going to tell you this right now, the uglier your garden is, the better it is. So if you see a garden that's pristine, just beautiful soil, or no weeds, nothing, chances are it's a little bit thin on nutrients. When you have stirred compost and plant material and food scraps into your soil, it's not going to be the prettiest, but it's going to be much healthier. So, established garden, you stir those things in, you keep it, don't stir it in too far. The soil, even the clay soil, the top 1.5 to 2 inches is where all of the nutrients are that we need as humans. There's magnesium and copper and zinc and all of those trace minerals that we need to have to be healthy are in that top couple inches. If you get all gung-ho and decide that I'm going to put a garden in, and you scrape off the grass and then turn that soil over, that top 2 inches then goes down. Imagine if all of the nutrients are there and you turn it and you turn it 6 inches down, if you go past, well, I know the number for 8. So if you go 8 to 10 inches, if you get someone to come in and rototill it and dig it down, and you're like, yeah, I took the grass out and I rototilled it and it's all beautiful. Well, at 8 to 10 inches, those nutrients that your body needed are going to take 80 years to get back to the top. It takes a long time for it to get back up there. So the less you can disturb and dig the soil, the better. What you can do is to make that soil more aerated and more friable, which is the word for when it's good for plants to grow in, is to create that soil by covering it. So established garden, things on top, kind of stirred in the soil. Non-established garden. Let's just say this is a patch of grass. We want to put a garden in. Yay! Okay, so old way that they started it was actually the folks that make chemical feeds that started talking about you needing to rototill and dig and all of this stuff. That's who did that. What is the better idea and the old idea and organic is this space would then get covered. You can use newspaper because they've eliminated the toxic ink in newspaper now. Because newspapers literally used to kill you when you read them. If you read a paper continuously over time because it had a lot of arsenic in it, it doesn't have that in anymore. No shiny pages, just the newspaper. 6 sheets, and you cover this space so not one spot of the grass will be showing. Okay? So that's your first layer. And this is a lasagna type garden, which is my recommendation to every single person. And then on top of that, you put some of your browns I talked about, maybe some leaves, maybe some grass clippings. If you look around, there's all kinds of stuff. At this time of year, do not put tall weeds because they have their seeds on them. The only possible way you could do that would be if you take those weeds, cut the tops off, break them up and put them in to make sure you're not getting any seeds in there. So all your browns, we have paper, all your brown material, leaves, grass clippings, cardboard, more shredded newspaper. On top of that, you're going to put scraps from your kitchen, leaves from things. I'm always kind of scooting over to like plant stores, etc. Because when leaves fall, they just sweep them up and they usually have them in a bin. I'm like, what you gonna do with that? And they usually say nothing. I'm like, can I take that? And they're like, what are you doing with it? You know, just making stuff. They're usually pretty generous with their sweeping. So, and then I'll just go through and make sure there's nothing in it toxic or whatever. And by toxic, I mean oak leaves, poison ivy, poison oak, and you don't want to put those things in your garden because there's nothing worse than going out and digging your carrots and ending up with poison ivy all over your everything. You wouldn't think to not touch yourself because you wouldn't know that, but don't put those things in your garden space. So we're at paper, we're at browns, and we're at greens, table scraps, all the table scraps from your house, veggies, fruit, all that kind of stuff. No meat, no oil. Should go on your garden. If you have a compost pile, you can create layers with those things. There is one particular compost that you can actually put meat, bones, oil, everything can go into it. It's actually a contained space where you keep worms. Because worms, in their gloriousness, we call it gold when they poop everywhere. Worm poop is the best. And because the worms are doing certain kind of things in the, I know, this sounds super fun, does it? But it really is, and I'm quite fond of worm poop. Vermiculture is what it's called. We could do a whole nother discussion just about worms. Worms are so fun. You can put those things in a place where you have lots of worms, and the red wigglers are the best for that. There's a European night crawler that is also good if you can get those. I usually, when I'm creating a space for someone to have a garden for the first time, do the paper, and you can also do cardboard. It doesn't have to be paper. You can also do cardboard. Cardboard boxes, I usually make sure there's no staples or anything on them, spread them out, and then do your layers. So paper, brown, green, and then you can do a sprinkle, just a sprinkle of prepared compost or peat. not a whole bunch. Because think about this, we're putting it down on soil that is clay. And let's talk about what they make bricks or adobe out of. Clay, straw, and peat. So those things together make a brick. You don't want to turn your garden into a brick. So you just want a sprinkle of it if you use it. You just want a thin layer of it. And then you continue on again. Then you go more browns. The easiest brown for people who don't have a lot of leaves and stuff at this time, if you're just preparing it now, would be shredded newspaper. And you just rip it into long skinny strips and put it on, looks like a big pile of spaghetti, and then you cover that with some more table scraps, and then you put a little bit of soil on it, and then you do some more browns, which is your cardboard and paper and that kind of thing, but it has to be really small, finely shredded. And then more greens if you have them. I suggest start collecting table scraps now. If you have family and friends that are interested, you can ask them to save them. I mistakenly asked about a dozen of my friends to save their scraps for me, because I was going to do a garden for an older lady, and she didn't think she could come up with that much since she ate one piece of fruit a week and hardly any vegetables. So I asked them to save it, and it was the biggest mistake I ever made. 12 people filled the back of my pickup truck with table scraps. That's how much stuff. Just think about that. If I hadn't asked for it, it would have gone to the dump. That would have been disposed of there. And when those kind of things get compressed in with other garbage, they don't usually break down very well. So we're actually doing our earth a big favor by putting that stuff in our garden. So ask your family and friends to help you and to save that stuff. You put it on top. The last thing you're going to do, because if you're just doing it now in the spring, the last thing you're going to do is you're going to put a layer of soil on top. This is the most costly part of doing it, but I always recommend that people don't get crazy. Don't think that because you're going to grow things in it this year that you have to have this much soil on top. You really need about 3 or 4 inches at best, because all of the stuff that you put down is going to break down through the season. The plant is going to still go in there. All of those table scraps, etc., are going to break down, and you're going to have the most beautiful garden. The other beautiful and advantageous thing that happens from this is that lasagna layers that you created on top of your grass kills the grass, so no weeds, and it turns that hard packed clay soil into a much more friable, usable soil. Every year you'll add to it. The first year it's raised up, it's up off the ground, but as the season goes on, as it's watered and the plants grow, it'll flatten down a little. But by the following year it'll be level with the ground. Sometimes it happens by the fall. In the fall you need to do that again. I always recommend to people, if you're in the fall of the first season after your lasagna garden's been in, do the whole thing. Start again. At the top, take your plants out that are from your garden, the previous wonderful, successful garden you had, shred them up, put them down, put more newspaper over it, do your browns, do your greens, so your carbon and your nitrogen, your peat, more browns and greens, and then more soil, and then just leave it for the winter. Let nature do its thing. The rain, the snow, all of that is going to break all of that down. And in the springtime, when you walk out there, you're going to be miles ahead of everyone else. Your garden will be ready to go. The beautiful part about that is remember how I talked about the Thanksgiving dinner being depleted by the second year? That's with just having soil. But because you're feeding it with all of the compost, etc., in the layers that you did, it's going to be just like brand new, and the plants are going to be happier. You're going to really have an opportunity to get a humongous amount of fruits and vegetables out of your garden. So that's my quickest version ever of doing a lasagna garden, getting it started. I'll allow a few minutes at the end for questions about stuff, so if you have a question you can hang on to it, or if you feel like you need to have it answered now. Okay, so we've got our garden space created. I feel like I'm going really fast, but I don't have a lot of time. You've got your garden, your soil created, and the soil is, of course, the most important part. But just as important to that is seeds. One of the things that I do in January, February, and March is I get seed catalogs. I brought one. Seed catalogs, and I pick out a few things that I might want. I don't know. There's a few sticky notes. I'm like, oh yeah, that looks really good. And I'll go through and I'll mark them. I don't very often buy them from the seed company unless I can actually go there. And I prefer to, this is my own choice, and it's entirely up to you, but I will give you stink eye if you tell me you're buying GMO seeds. And you don't want stink eye from me. My granddaughter taught me how. So I will search out what I want, and then I will go looking for them organic. So let's talk really quick about some of the different ways they identify seeds. So there's organic, which means it's grown in an organic situation. You have to know the organic company because organics have changed over the years. Organic literally used to mean that you didn't use anything to grow it. You just put it in the ground, you grew it. But because we are so fond of a perfect apple, a perfect tomato, a perfect cucumber, they started allowing organic companies to incorporate things in that were organically inclined. So you can be a complete organic farm and still use chemicals. They're deemed to be organically inclined or organic chemicals, so I'm really careful. Urban Harvest is a good place to get seeds. If you want to, on May 25th from 10 to 1, I'm going to have a whole bunch of seeds available at the garden opening at the community garden. You're welcome to come there and get seeds. I'm going to probably have some plants too. I work with a lady just outside of Caledonia. I don't know if you've heard of her, Matchbox Gardens, Hannah. She does everything. All of her stuff is done organically. And she does almost all of the work herself. So she's really good to deal with, and her seeds are always viable. That's the other thing, is sometimes you'll buy seeds that are considered organic and they don't grow because they aren't careful about their harvesting processes. So I make my dreams and lists and map out my garden, which is important. You want to look at your garden, you want to talk to someone, or you can go online. There's some things to look at online, but you have to be careful on what you're reading because it depends on where it is. Because if it's telling you, yes, of course, you're certainly welcome to grow avocados in your garden, chances are they don't mean here. Avocados will grow indoors, and you can get an avocado. You can grow lemons, limes, all that stuff, but indoors here. There are even some things like rosemary, the herbs are a little more difficult to define. Look at them, and if it says it is a soft wood or a soft perennial, that means where we are, it can't winter over. So those are all things to look at. But with seeds, and for herbs, I'll say this too, I always recommend to people here, with the exception of basil, to get your herbs as a plant. Just because a rosemary seed takes 40 days for it to germinate, and you have to keep it at 68 degrees. It has to have a certain amount of moisture. It's really hard to germinate a rosemary seed. Thyme is a little bit easier, but by the end of the season, your herbs will be about that big. Because when you buy them already in a plant, chances are you're getting either a 1 or 2 year old plant in there, or they're a cutting from a 1 or 2 year old plant. So herbs, I generally tell people, except basil. Basil will grow like a weed here. First frost, it's done, but you can grow it like mad from seeds. Dill will grow from seeds. So the herbs, and again, the herb class discussion could be a whole one on its own. So your seeds, you've looked at what they are. One of the things that is most important to remember, people, this is what happens. They put their little seed in the ground and they go, and they push it down. See how far my finger's sticking through there? Bend your little finger like this, and see that little piece right there? The only seed that goes that deep in the ground is your beans. And then just under that is your corn. But seeds like cucumber, any of the smaller seeds, tomato seeds, they need to be like an 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch under the ground. I generally, radish, all of the small seeds, I put them on the soil and cover them with soil rather than putting, because then you're not inclined to push them in the ground. Because imagine, and tomato seeds are the worst for this, if you put them in, push them down, and you push them that far down, they're down there and they're like, yeah, I'm going to be a plant, I'm going to be, where is the sun? Oh man, I give up. And it'll literally just give up and just lay there. Pepper seeds are worse. They're barely under the ground when you plant them. Pepper seeds need to be started. If you're going to plant peppers in your garden and you actually want the plants, you have to start your seeds now. Technically, they should have been started about 3 weeks ago, because peppers take a long time to get a little plant going. You don't transplant your little babies until they go in the garden. Some people feel inclined. It comes up. There's some, Tanis has got some over here, some radishes. She had them on paper, right? And then she put them into those plastic containers. I'm trying not to walk around too much. That's okay. They'll only come over here for a second. She got them in these really cool little tiny micro greenhouses. Look at that. Isn't that the cutest thing you ever saw? It's a berry box. It's what you buy your berries in the store, or those tiny tomatoes. This is a perfect little greenhouse. It'll open. It doesn't need a lot of water because it retains the moisture. It also has drain holes. So, because this is where I'm going to talk to you what happens to seeds. Not only do they sometimes get planted too far in the ground, but the most common reason a seed doesn't make it is it gets too big a drink too often. So if you're planting your seeds in, even if you're starting them ahead of time or you're planting them in your garden, you make sure they're planted the right depth, and then you give them a small drink. Teeny tiny, just enough to wet the ground around them, and then you wait. They don't need to be watered twice a day, not even once a day. We used to not have to water gardens outside, but with climate change, you now have to water. Used to be you could water like maybe once a week. Well, not at all, then down to once a week. I went to 2 times a week this past summer and the summer before. In the community garden, I had to water every day. The climate has changed so much. It's so hot. The temperatures don't seem that much higher, but they are. And what's happened is the soil dries a lot quicker. All of that climate stuff has bearing on everything. They do need to be watered. Here's the difficulty. If you water your seed and it's enough for it to drink, it's like, that's perfect. But then you're like panicky because the ground looks dry on top, and you pour some more water to it. It goes, I'm not really thirsty, but I'll drink a little more. And then the next day you look at it and like, oh, it's dry again. And you're just looking at the top, and the little seed is like, well, I can't drink no more. And the next day it's like, glub, glub, glub. And it gives up. Because they need air and space, not just water and soil. So they kind of drowned. And you wouldn't think so because the ground looks dry. The best thing to do is to check your soil, is to scratch away an inch to see if there's moisture in the ground. The surface might be completely dry, and then just underneath it'll be wet. I need you to know that I'm really cramming a lot of information into a small amount of time, and if you have more questions about this, you're welcome to come and find me over at Health. I'm in Health Promotions, or Tanis has got my number. You can get it from her, or my email. So that's the difficulty with seeds, is they quite often get overwatered, and especially in those small containers when they're first starting out, because you think, I put them into a baggie with water and paper, they must need a lot of water. Literally all that's happening is when they're in the paper, we're just letting that little baby plant out. So when you're doing your garden and you've done this process, it's important to note when you are transplanting, you cannot transplant, do not transplant until it's got a set of true leaves. So every seed, I'm a seed, here's my little baby plant, it'll come up and 2 leaves will form. And those very first two leaves are not true leaves. Those are the workers. They literally fight the way out for that baby plant. And they put they create the space for it to collect its first light, its first sunlight and moisture. When the stem goes up and more leaves come, those are the first true leaves. That's when you can transplant. If you transplant when it's just got two leaves, quite often they will struggle. The plant hasn't established itself, as the root system won't be enough for it to know that it can be okay. If you go to purchase plants and you pull the plant out of the pot and it's completely white with roots, first of all, they planted them too soon, but you're going to want to do a little bit of tickling. So tickle those roots. I do it with kids. They go tickle, 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 thump, 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 tickle, 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 thump, thump, thump. And that just breaks a little bit of the soil away from those compacted roots. And then you put it in the ground. If the roots if it isn't root bound or isn't stuck in there, you don't have to do that. But that's important if you're purchasing plants from a nursery, Canadian Tire, any of those kind of places. Quite often they're planted early, forced with close light, lots of food. So they'll get a big root system because they're trying to find food. If you don't do some tickling and patting of that root ball, and when you put it in the ground, at the end of the season, that plant may not have done as well, or it may have, but you will see that the roots are still in that tiny ball because they didn't get panicked to go looking for more food. So you tickle them and you pat that root ball so that it'll go looking for food. They're like, someone's stealing all my food here, let's go find somewhere else. So they'll move. And then you'll get a better root base in the ground and the plant will be healthier. And with healthier plants, more flowers mean more produce. Okay, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So we've got our soil ready, we've put our seeds in, our plants have started. We talked a little bit about how much to water. Let's talk about feeding our garden. If this is your first go round at it and you've put paper on top of grass, you've put all of your carbon and nitrogen layers in and your soil in, the very first year, you don't have to feed it. It's not going to want you to feed it. It's not going to need it. There's enough food there for that to happen. If you are working with an established garden that you were a little chintzy with the compost and stuff in the fall or the spring, you may want to feed it. The very best thing in the world to feed it is compost tea, aka manure tea, also known as playing with poop. Cow poop works, sheep poop works. I use horse because I have horses. I feed my horses only grains that are crimped or rolled or pellets. Make sure you find that out. If someone says, I have a ton of horse poop or cow poop, find out if they feed them whole grains, because what will happen is a majority of those whole grains will go into your garden, and then your garden will flourish in grass and timothy and weeds and all that stuff. So you're going to want to make sure it's a manure, first of all, that doesn't have grain in it. Second of all, that is at least 18 months it's been sitting, at least. So if it's under a year, you use it to make tea. Tea is just some manure tied in a piece of cheesecloth, just like a tea bag. You hang it in the pail, pour some water in it, and then you stir. You wait a little while and you stir it some more. And then when it looks like a nice, beautiful dark cup of tea, like you drink it, then you can feed it to your plants. If it's super dark, if you forget it and leave it for a couple of hours instead of an hour or so, then I would dilute it a little bit with water. It's not going to stink as bad. I can hear all of you. That's going to be disgusting. I don't want to play with poop. But that is the best thing in the world for your plants, because all of the work was done by the animal. Ran through the digestion, came out the compost hole at the back, and was perfect. So that's the best thing to feed it with. There are organic feeds that you can use. One of the processes we used, because we're agricultural and we did a lot of growing, one of the processes we used was, especially in our mounds, we would put fish into the mound. So I wanted to be like doing it the way, right? So I made my mounds and I dug a hole and I put the fish bodies in there, and then I put my corn seeds in and they came up, and then I put my bean seeds in and was going to wait a day and put my squash seeds in, and then raccoons came and dug up all my mounds and got all my fish bodies. So I don't do fish bodies anymore. If you're going to use fish as food for in your garden, which you can do, I recommend you get a pail, you put the fish. If you know a fisher, someone who fishes, I love to fish. I actually take 2 vacations a year and they're just to go fishing. Put the fish, cut up fish pieces in there and add water. And you know those really cool blenders they have for mixing drywall? It's like really super long and you put it on a drill. Zzz, use that. And it'll mix it all up, make a slurry. Then you can put that into your soil in your mound, either underneath it or dig a hole deep enough down where it's going to be feeding that. The joy of growing your corn, beans, and squash together, which I recommend to everyone no matter what. There are tons of other companion plants I could talk about. We only have a few more minutes left. Maybe we'll do that another time. But those 3 in particular, corn, beans, and squash, have the right amount of carbohydrates, the right amount of amino acids, and the right amount of protein for your body to sustain itself. I mean, it would be boring to eat that every meal, but you could do it. You literally could do it. I mean, there are other things. There's enough fiber. We could go on. But those 3 things, not only are they good for your body, but they grow well together, right? The corn goes in first. You wait till it's up, and then you put your bean seeds in. The beans grow up the corn. We could do the 3 sisters story if I had time, but we don't. And then the squash goes in. So the beans feed the soil. This is important for people to know, because everyone thinks just doing those 3 things together, right off the bat, it's going to be the right amount of nitrogen. You still need to put some kind of nitrogen into that mound, because it takes till the 2nd year for those beans to have placed the nitrogen in the mound, right? So this is another way that the soil gets fed. The bean plants are there. They fix nitrogen in the soil. Their roots, the plant itself fixes the nitrogen in the soil, but it will take till the next season for that to happen. So don't expect there to be enough nitrogen the first year. So how do we get nitrogen? Food scraps, right? Put our food scraps in, yeah. So stir those into your mound. You can also use the fish slurry that I talked about. Using the whole fish down in the mound is up to you. Like I said, I had a little bit of a raccoon problem myself. Like, not a little bit of a raccoon. They decimated 6 mounds, just totaled them and took all the fish carcasses I'd put in there. So, yeah, so then the squash itself is important to those other 2 items because it literally does its job of keeping the moisture in. A mound will need to be watered much less than a line garden. So if you're doing corn in rows, and we would have done that in, like there is discussion about mounds that are like the size of where the tables are. Generally, I recommend to people, if you're going to do a mound for yourself, for your family, that you do it, you kneel on the ground, one hand down, and reach as far as you can. That's the center of your mound. Because you want to be able to pick the beans without disturbing your mound. You don't want to walk in your mound after it's put together. So you'll want to pick the beans. Corn is the last thing, so by then you can walk on the mound. The squash will be done. But the squash will keep the moisture in there. Also, squash leaves have underneath them little prickly hairs. If you ever put your arms underneath a squash plant and come up with a kind of a rash, that's from those hairs. Those hairs keep critters away, bugs away. Possums are terrible for stealing squash, so if you have squash that you're waiting for it to develop, just tuck it under where a leaf is, and then the possum won't bother, because that really bothers their skin. We only have a couple of minutes left. I want to leave enough time for questions. So we did soil, we did seeds, we did water, we did food. Does anyone have questions? I know there's questions. I can just hear them, but you're not sure. Yes.
Is there anything that doesn't grow good beside each other?
Yeah, so there is. Actually, there's quite a few things. The one thing that I always tell people for sure not to do, Grow your potatoes about a step away from everything else. Leave a little bit of a space because potatoes fart. They actually produce like a gas underneath ground where they are, and the other plants are like, I can't grow here, this is bad. So the farty potatoes are the worst ones. So yeah, you'll notice if you think of gardens, like I think of my grandma's garden, everything would be here, then there was like a row to walk down, and then the potatoes were there, or they were in a square by themselves. That's that. It's the farty potatoes syndrome. So yeah, but that's a good question. There are some things. You don't want to grow garlic by something that's sweet. But tomatoes and basil are like the best ever. Both of them keep bugs away from each other. I don't grow garlic and onions together. Just my garlic has a tendency, I think, and maybe it's in my mind, but I've asked others and they felt the same. It makes my onions really like super, I want to say hot, but that's not really the word. It's like pungent, like you don't want to breathe on people for 3 days. That kind of smell for your onions. But there are lots of them. They're like, we could talk about what not to grow with each other. It's easier to figure out what does grow together. No matter what you plant, put some marigolds in your garden. Marigolds keep bugs away, the smell of them. Most critters don't like them. If you have problems with bunnies, here's what you do. You make the bunnies their own little wee garden a ways away from your garden, like along the edge of the bush line. A tiny garden where you just throw seeds down and let come up whatever. I fence it on my side, so they're keeping me out. I've had really good success with that. There's lots of bunnies in the yard where my garden is, but if I make them their own separate garden right along the bush line and I fence it like I'm trying to protect it from me, then they're all happy and they generally stay in there. I don't have a lot of problems with bunnies. And we do have a lot of bunnies because our garden edges on a bush, so there's lots of bunnies. Again, there's a lot of plants that love to grow together, but like I said, it's pages and pages of, we could keep writing. And I just only have a couple minutes left. You had a question. Thanks for the question.
You said nitrogen besides the beans, how else you keep the nitrogen?
Well, the nitrogen is important to the nitrogen is what helps the plants to produce nice, dark, big green leaves, or whatever color leaves they are. The soil needs the nitrogen. That helps plant growth. The beans fix the nitrogen in the soil, but you can put the nitrogen into your soil. That's where your table scraps come in, your torn up leaves, green leaves, like from weeds that don't have seeds or flowers on them. That's where your nitrogens come from. Stuff that's going to break down like that. And worms. You can't go wrong with buying a couple of things of worms to throw in your garden or your compost pile, because they do amazing work. Any other questions? Like I said, briefest synopsis ever of all of this information. There's like tons more. Literally, when I said 2 months, it could be longer. That's a really good question. So because you want to try and maintain the moisture in your garden, I always tell people the same thing. It comes down to how much effort you're going to put in. If you need to kneel on the ground to weed, to clean up around the plants or whatever, then you need to leave space for you, because you're a part of that garden too. If you're able to just kind of bend and reach, then they can be much closer together. Each thing is going to be different. Radishes, you need to give them 3 fingers apart because they need to have space to grow that bulb. But if it's a plant where the top of it is going to be big, and that's where you're going to get your stuff, like peas, they'll grow up on things, and then we could get into the whole discussion about how to trellis things and how to put fences and stuff. But it comes down to enough space that they have their own little table to eat at. So generally, like 2-3 fingers for sure. Onions, I do 2 fingers. Garlic, I do 4. Radishes, I do 3. And you get an eye for it after a while. So potatoes, everybody thinks you have to put a whole potato in the ground to grow a potato, and I leave 1.5 feet between potato plants. But and tomato plants, same thing, because a tomato seed, that tiny tomato seed, grows into a plant that's this big around. So you need to allow that much space. And sometimes physically, what you can do is do that and look at it and say, okay, so 2 feet, and then I want to allow 6 or 8 inches in between, and then the next seed, because everyone makes a mistake of putting their seeds in 2 or 3 inches apart, and then there's 45 tomato plants in a row, and none of them do well because they're too crammed together and fighting for food. A long time ago, and I can say this, when I was a kid, because I'll be 60 this year, when the garden was all planted, we weren't instant gratification people in those days. When I was small, the only thing you saw in the garden, if we were in the same places we'd been the year before, my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved a lot, was the strawberries. That was the only green you saw in the garden. This whole thing about people rushing out, spending $300-400 on plants, coming back, putting them in, putting all the plants in, everything's planted and it's already up, and you're like, ah. No, when I was little, and this is important to know because it's not expensive to garden if you do it the right way, the only thing that was in the garden when we were done was sticks and string. There was sticks marking the rows and string was attached to it so you didn't walk where the seeds were going to be. You walked between them. That's how a garden should be. And everybody gets seeds. A pack of seeds, when you pick up a pack of seeds at the store, there's probably like 20, 25 in there. No one has space anymore for 25 cucumber plants. Well, I do at the community garden, but generally you don't. You're generally growing 3 or 4. Team up with some other folks you know that are gardening. Go together or buy some stuff and then post on there like, I'm putting in a garden in, but I have a ton of seeds left of this and this. Does anybody have anything you want to trade with me? Right? So if you're buying seeds, there's a couple of companies. OSC is a seed company that their seed price is lower. And I've talked to 2 people now. They are a lower price because they don't spend the money on chemicals and modifications and stuff. Look on them for, it probably won't say organic because it's very expensive to be organic, but it might say heritage or heirloom. Heritage seeds are seeds that are 45, they've been cultivated for 45 years. So from a plant, open pollination, which means out in the ground. Heirloom is seeds, same exact thing. One has a story, one doesn't. These were my grandma's, these were grown in a field. So that's pretty much the only difference. There's a brand new set of seeds out there called vintage. And vintage seeds come in beautiful packages. And they're the old seeds. And they're like $7 a package. And they're like the same seeds that are in the $1.99 package. They've just created a new niche. People want vintage stuff, so they even have vintage seeds. I saw vintage watermelon seeds that were $12.95. There was 8 seeds in there. Made me want to make my own vintage packaging for my watermelon seeds. Could make a fortune, I'd retire. Yeah, so vintage is not an indicator of anything about the seeds itself. It's a marketing tool. So, organic, heirloom, or heritage. That's what you're looking for. Organic is going to be your most expensive. Heirloom and heritage quite often are grown organically. I'm going to check into it. There's one of the companies that, well, these guys are pretty good. They have lots of them, and they are close to us, pretty close to us. They have lots of stuff in there. But the idea of sharing seeds for me is part of gardening. And part of gardening is reconnecting, not just to the land that we have our feet on, but to each other. It's important to me. That's one of the most important things. Food sustainability, food sovereignty is an important issue right now. You can't be sovereign if you're not sustainable. And I can't say that enough. If you are dependent on someone else to feed you, which we all are, then you can't be sovereign. As a human being, as a Haudenosaunee person, as anything, as long as you are dependent on something else, you are not sovereign. So to be sovereign, to become a sovereign nation, we need to learn how to feed ourselves, right? We need to learn how to feed ourselves. I think it's important. Not only that, they are now producing food in labs. If you like honey, please only buy unpasteurized honey from a beekeeper. There's one at the end of First Line. There's a few of them around. But make sure it's raw, unpasteurized honey, because China is now making honey in a lab. They don't even have bees for it anymore. They don't have to. They've figured out the process, how to make honey without bees. I wept when I found that out. I was so devastated. When you buy Billy Bee, how many of you love the little Billy Bee container in the store? So cute, little bear, got all honey in him. It's about 11% honey. The rest of it's corn syrup, cornstarch, corn something, or water, or 11%. By law, they only have to have 11% honey in there. I could stay here a really long time and talk about that kind of stuff too. Does anyone have any gardening questions really quick? And bees are important. Don't be afraid. I'm hoping in the next little while to set up a bee station at the community garden. Come and see me there sometimes so that you can learn how to do it, and I can connect you with beekeepers who will help you set up bees in your yard, teach you how to care for them. You can buy them, or sometimes the beekeepers are just looking for some place to put some hives.
Where's the community garden?
At the end of Sunrise Court. It's been there since 2011. I'm hoping to put a sign up for it so that people can find us. Sunrise Court is that where you turn between Social Services and Ontario Works, that little road across from the plaza. It's at the, just as the curve happens back there. That's where I am. There's a big blue sign that doesn't have anything on it, just blue. But it'll be a sign eventually. Yes?
Can you come help me put the garden in my house?
Yeah. Okay, so let me talk about this. I used to go and do consultations for people. We can talk about that if you're interested in me coming to take a look. I do sometimes come and help people choose the right spot to have the garden, etc. What kind of things to put in. Yes? Kitty R. Lynn Liquors. I'm at Health and Health Promotions. That's the floor I'm on, second floor at the Health Building.
How does this community garden work? Like, do you just bring in seeds, or
You can if you want to.
just come and help?
You can come to.
They can go get whatever they want.
We have beds already in, and the things that are in the beds that are marked community, that means if it's there and you're there, you can take stuff home. I have a bed in of garlic. It's already up. It's so pretty. You have to come see it. The garlic's up that high already. And all of the other beds will have different things in them. I gave away a ton of food last year, a ton. But I also am putting in 10 by 10 or 12 by 12, I haven't decided yet, boxes for community members. We had community members gardening last year just on the ground. This year we're going to put them in a box. So I have spaces for that.
I'll volunteer in the community, and that's all time if you want me to go deliver them to Albany or Wheat Baskets or whatever.
You know what? They come to the garden. They get medical drivers and stuff to bring them. It's very darling. And I do like a coffee club in the morning where a lot of seniors come. Coffee club is in the garden. It starts in May. Yeah, you'll see it in the leisure guide. But yeah, you can get hold of me at Health too. So, any other questions real quick? Thank you so much for, oh, sorry. Yes? Okay, so I do an entire discussion, because that's how I try to plant, is by the moon. But yeah, women on their moon time. So here, let me tell you, I was raised that you can't plant. You are not supposed to actually work with the plants themselves, but you can still work in your garden because it has to do with power. So I always ask my ladies that are on their moon time to work with the weeds, because let's take their power. Yeah, so you can beat the band at that time. So that's a really good question. Thanks for asking that. Anything else, folks? Yes. Crows? Yeah, see, we just had this discussion because they did this questionnaire, and I'm actually a raven, trickster, naughty girl. Crows are attracted to shiny. So I always, the little crow, crows are all about the shiny. So you go to the dollar store, and those little stick-on gems that you can get for books and stuff like that. Create a space where you put corn cobs, seeds, whatever, away from your garden, and put a bunch of those on little sticks all around it, and they'll come and investigate, and they'll find that, and most often leave your garden alone. Crows and ravens are notorious, however, for eating your corn plants because they love them. I always, as soon as the corn comes up, put a stake in the ground, tie 2 pie plates to it on strings, and put streamers on it, and keep that going until the corn, because they won't eat it once it's this high. When it's that high, they'll eat it off right at the ground and dance a joy for it because they love it. Anything else? No? Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you learned a little something today. There's lots of fun stuff here to take a look at. Please take a moment or two to look at that. All of the treasures that Tanis and the crew have put out. I think they're going to do a draw. Thanks, guys.